Rolling. 2. Go.
My name is Teresa Freitas, and I am begging for someone to help me in my son's death, for us to get him justice, for us to find out what really happened. I have petitioned the county in Texas that his remains were found in, and they will not help us. I have gathered evidence, I've gathered information that gives them just cause to look into his death, and they will not even consider it. My son's name's Jacob Witt. He left home here in Florida to go to Texas in 1997. He immediately got a job. He lived in the Fort Worth, Texas area. Roughly January 26th of 1998, he left work with his paycheck to never be seen again. Everything that he owned vanished. He vanished. I searched for my son for 12 years. In 2010, I got the call that a sheriff's office claimed they had my son. I was later to find out that they had matched his DNA with my DNA in the National DNA Data Bank in North Texas, and they informed me that the 12 years I had been looking for my son, he'd been laying in a John Doe grave. They then proceeded to inform me that as far as they were concerned, my son shot himself and they would not investigate. They told me the only way they would investigate is if I got more evidence. I have spent the past few years gathering evidence, and every time I present it to them or tell them anything, they still say it's not enough. I don't know what the problem is. Everyone else outside of this county, the governor's office in Texas that I contacted, the state attorney's office clearly told me that I had a justified reason, that I had a good argument and that it needed to be looked into, and that if Ellis County opened it up, that Texas State Attorney's Office would assist in any way they could. I've contacted judges asking for help in Texas. One replied, told me he couldn't or wouldn't. The other one never even replied to me. I cannot get any response out of the Ellis County Sheriff's Office. No one's ever called me. The only time I heard from them was when they told me that they had had my son for 12 years and to tell me that my son was a vagrant. My son was not a vagrant. He worked hard every day. They found my son in remains in a wooded area. He was stuffed in a sleeping bag with his size 13 work boots on. He had nothing on him, not a penny, not an ID, nothing, and my son never left home without his ID. Near his remains, which this is conflicting, one report says the gun was in the sleeping bag, the other report claims the gun was 3 foot from the body. There was a Charter 44 arms. They're claiming that my son totally wiped out his existence, walked over 35 miles from where he lived to a heavily wooded area, climbed in a sleeping bag, laid on his right side, and shot himself towards the back of his head. I've done research on suicide. According to them, that's impossible. All suicides are either in the temple, under the chin, or in the mouth. I have screenshots that were designed off of the Dallas County autopsy report, and it clearly shows that the bullet went into my son's head, near the back of his head, and went straight through his skull. Even if he could reach the gun back there, a 44 Charter Arms is a very heavy handgun, and it would have had a kick, and the bullet wouldn't have went totally straight through his skull. I have tried everything. I cannot get them to investigate, and everyone else I contacted in Texas informs me that Ellis County holds the key. They have to agree to investigate. Can you cut this for a minute? Okay, go ahead. The main problems that I've had over the last 3 years is, sadly, Ellis County, Texas. Let me give you an idea of just what I have went through. Number one, when they called, and yes, they called, they did not call the county that I live in Florida and ask the sheriffs to come and tell me that my son was dead. They just called and said, "We have your son." And that was it. And that's exactly how they said it in the tone of voice. Yeah, we have your son. Since that day, I went from one nightmare of not knowing where my son was to the second nightmare. They will not allow anyone to see the gun, see any evidence. I've never seen anything of my son's belongings, not one thing. They never run a check on the gun. Their excuse was that part of the serial number was scratched off. When I finally was able to get a police report, this is how this went, so that you have an idea of just what I'm hitting up against. I called Ellis County Sheriff's, asked them for a copy of the police report. The woman I spoke to said that she could email it to me. When I checked my email box, it was a blank piece of paper. I called her back and said, "Is this a joke?" She said, "No, but you haven't applied for an open records permit." Well, when I did apply for the open records permit, I find out that in Texas, even if you apply for an open records permit, they can give you what they want and hold out what they don't. So all I got was part of a police report. I've got part of an autopsy report. When I requested a full autopsy report with photos, even though I really don't want to see them, I have to do it in this investigation, they told me to get a lawyer. When I asked them for a full police report, they told me that they reminded me I was not in Florida, that they were not in Florida, and I needed to get a lawyer. There is a Captain Norman in Ellis County that supposedly got my son's information. I have repeatedly called him. He has never called me back. The letter from the governor's office that referred me to contact prosecuting attorney in Ellis County, Patrick Wilson, I have contacted him numerous times. I've sent him information. The last phone call we had was on, the last conversation I had with Patrick Wilson of the prosecuting attorney's office in Ellis County was on June 20th of this year, 2013. He had me on speakerphone, and he also had a Mr. Martin in there that also works for the prosecuting attorney's office. They previously had informed me that everyone on my son's case had been fired from Ellis County Sheriff's Office. Their first comment was to me was to give me a name and a phone number of a funeral home and to advise me that it'd be cheaper if I had my son's body cremated. I proceeded to tell them that I didn't want to attempt to do anything like that until something was done with this case. I will highlight this conversation for you. I asked Mr. Wilson if this was his son and his son's screenshot, would he accept that his son committed suicide? He would not answer me. He would not give me an answer. Then a few seconds later, he said, "This isn't a conspiracy." I never said anything about a conspiracy whatsoever to nobody. Not whatsoever. He proceeds to tell me that in Waxahachie, Texas, and yes, I've been there, that he's extremely busy. He proceeded to tell me, do I have any idea how much trouble it would be to reopen my son's case and possibly have to change his death certificate? Then he proceeded to tell me that I still didn't have enough evidence and that I needed to gather more evidence. I told him he had enough evidence. He once again reminded me that he is extremely busy in Ellis County, Texas, and that he wasn't making me any promises. I have since wrote him a letter and asked him to reconsider and please to do something about my son's case. He has more than enough information. I gave them a name of an individual. The man's name is Daniel Glady. I have never met this man. I would like to meet this man. From what I understand, he's been in and out of the Texas prison system. He was friends with my son when my son was vanished, and everyone I've spoke to has always said that they felt this man held the answers to what happened to my son. Now I have it in emails that there was an investigator that went to visit him one time in prison, and this individual asked what was in it for him. He has refused to take a lie detector test, and yes, Ellis County is very aware of this individual. I have begged them to go talk to him. I have begged them to see if they could find out something. They won't bother. They just are not going to be bothered. I don't know why they're fighting so hard against me. I don't know Texas law, and they know that. I don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to hire a high-powered lawyer, and they know that. I know that they just want me to go away. The information that I send with this video will clearly show you that there's many questions in this. Many questions in my son's case. My son never shot a gun in his life. And all of a sudden he's supposed to pick up a Charter 44 Arms, which is a rare gun, walk 35 miles and shoot himself in the head well enough to shoot straight through his skull. It makes no sense. And if that was the case, where was my son's paycheck, money? Where was his ID? Why was his apartment cleaned out? Why was his Social Security card there was someone that attempted to use my son's Social Security card in Dallas in 2003 or 2004. I begged the authorities then to check in to see. They said it wasn't worth their while. He had a car that he was not able to drive. It shows up in a junkyard in 2004. Someone had signed his name to that title. Again, I asked the authorities to please check into it to find out who's doing this stuff. They said it wasn't worth their while. I need help. I need help. I don't know what to do. I've given them everything I could give them. I did have a private investigator. Sadly, we lost him this past July to cancer. That man promised me 12 years ago he would work on my son's case until the day he died, and that's exactly what he was doing the day he died, was still working on my son's case. Just a side note, when we first found out about Jacob, my private investigator, Ozzy Allsbrook, went to Ellis County. He wanted to look at the evidence. They took him to a room, would not permit him to have his cell phone, and they set him down and they handed him a partial police report. They would not allow him to see any of my son's belongings. They would not allow him to see the gun. And they would not talk about the case with him. So I'm not the only one that's being shut out. Now I am, because I've lost my private investigator. His wife is supposed to be compiling 12 years of records. Hopefully I may learn a little more in all the records that he had over the 14 years on my son. But we both clearly believed that my son did not kill himself. I'm not a mother in denial. There are problems here. And once you go through the packet that I send with this video, I believe you clearly will see there's a problem too. I'm just begging for someone's help. Thank you. An idea of the big question here in the autopsy report under Jackie Miller, which is an Ellis County judge. It states here that he was sending unidentified skeleton remains of what appeared to be an adult male. The body was discovered in a very wooded section of Ellis County near a creek of a private residence. The owners of the property were checking survey markers when they discovered the dead. The skeletal remains were observed partially in a sleeping bag. Ellis County Sheriff's officers found the skull about 50 feet from the body. It appears the dead was a gunshot wound to the head. A revolver was found in the sleeping bag. So my son shot himself and then stuffed the revolver into the sleeping bag? This is official Ellis County or Dallas County coroner's report from the autopsy report.